Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yoimar, Eloi Kelichem. Aidabru alei Yerushalayim, Vekiru eileha. Dabru alei Yerushalayim, Vekiru eileha. Ididai Adonai, Adonai,
Nachamu, Nachamu. My people should be comforted. We have 7 Shabbases of consolation after Tisha B'Av as we gear up to Rosh Hashanah. And we're in this beautiful, ascending, elevating spirituality during that whole period. We read this in the Haftorah. It's Isaiah, right? It's Isaiah, not Jeremiah. My people should be comforted. Nachamu, Nachamu. And there, you know, each of the Haftorahs, the additional reading from the prophets that we read on Shabbos morning has that theme of comfort, that even though the Jewish people have undergone such terrible tribulations, especially when the temple was destroyed, and then the second temple was destroyed, and we've been in that exile ever since, still, God is always with us. God is always available to us. And never more so than during this month of Elul, when the King is in the field and desiring our nearness to Him. Let's light up the darkness. Let's blow the shofar because it's Elul. And who is with us on Thursday? Nancy in North Carolina, Yehuda in South Carolina, Lucy in Minnesota, Renee in Indiana, Guy in Ohio, Stephen in New Hampshire, Tom in PA, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Bella in Texas, James in Indianapolis, John in Maine, Ruth in Colorado, Sharon in New Jersey, Shandora in the Bronx, Lisa in Massachusetts, Gregory in Indiana, David in South Bend. Where am I? Caroline in Raleigh, Paula in Chicago, Sam in Central Virginia, Marjorie in Virginia, Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Today's daf, a little bit challenging. We're going to have to put on our I'm paying attention caps. Let's see if we can do it. This is page Nun Zion, page 57, here in Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of marriage contracts. We are in chapter 5, today completing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 and opening Mishnah number 2. Mishnah number 1 was about a woman is not permitted to waive her right to a minimum amount in the marriage contract. We learned that from Rabbi Meir. But Rabbis Yosei and Rabbi Yehuda would allow her, let's say she's marrying a poor guy who cannot in good conscience promise to pay off a significant amount in the event of his death or divorce if he divorces her. And so he asked her to stipulate, to agree to a lesser amount. Rabbi Yosei says she can by verbal stipulation. Rabbi Yehuda says she can, but only by giving a written receipt that she received some of the amount, even though she didn't. But in other words, lowering the amount, and she agreed to that in writing. Some say, what does a receipt mean? That she actually hands over a receipt. Others say, what does a receipt mean? That they amend the marriage contract itself to show that she waived her right to some of that. She can certainly waive some of the amount when he promised to give more than that, rabbinically stipulated minimum amount. She can waive, her rights to some of that additional sum. He didn't have to give that. But according to Rabbi Meir and the majority view, she's entitled to that minimum amount, and even if she waives it, they have not waived it. Okay, we picked this up on 57a, a few paragraphs into it. So the Gemara relates that when Rav Dimi came from the land of Israel, and so yesterday we also had the question, what if, and so there was also the question, does she become entitled to the full amount of her kesuba if they divorce or the husband dies, right? So the minimum amount that all husbands have to promise, plus any additional amount that he may have given on top of that, which is fused with the minimum amount. But the majority view is if he dies or they divorce from the state of betrothal, she only gets the minimum amount, the standard amount. But once they reach marriage, they're fully married, then if he dies or they divorce, he owes, or the estate owes, the full amount, that minimum standard amount plus whatever else he promised, sort of voluntarily. So then they asked yesterday, well, what if they were betrothed? She had the wedding, the marriage contract. They made it to the wedding canopy, but they didn't consummate the union. And after much back and forth, they basically said once they get to the wedding canopy, they're married, even if they didn't have the chance to reach the marriage bed, as it were. All right, we continue that discussion. So the Gemara relates that when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, right, from the Jewish community in Israel, he went to the Jewish community in Bavel in Babylonia, the larger, safer community in Babylonia, because Israel was under the auspices and persecution of the Romans. So when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said that Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi and that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, both of them, said in the name of Bar Kapara that this dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei over whether the bride can stipulate to a lower amount than the minimum amount, and Rabbi Yosei says she can do that verbally, and Rabbi Yehuda said she can do it, but she can only do it in writing. So this dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei is referring, this dispute is only referring to the beginning of the process. What's the beginning of the process? We'll learn. But with regard to the end of the process, all agree that she cannot waive her rights by verbal confirmation alone, and she must instead write a receipt. What's the beginning of the process? What's the end of the process? In this context, they're going to argue what it means, but the possibilities are the beginning of the process means the beginning of the wedding ceremony, and the end of the process means after they have consummated the marriage by sleeping together, right? So it might be that the beginning is the beginning of the wedding and the end is the end of the wedding. It might be that the beginning is the beginning of, consummating by having marital relations, and the end is once they've done it, right? So we're going to have some different possibilities about up until when can she stipulate verbally, and at what point does any change in the wedding contract have to come by writing alone. So, according to this version, that Rav Dimi said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who said in the name of Bar Kapara, that dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei was concerning, whether one can do that with regard to the end. No, I mean, with regard to the end, they all agree that she can no longer waive her rights by verbal confirmation alone, and she must do it in writing. And Rabbi Yochanan said, both in this case and in that case, there is a dispute. I'm sorry. That chain of transmission was, right, let me just get it right. We got to keep it straight. The dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei concerning whether one may make a verbal stipulation with a woman to reduce her marriage contract is referring only to the beginning of the process. That's where the dispute is between Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Yochanan. But by the end, all agree that she has to do it in writing. Okay? That's one view. Rabbi Yochanan said, both in this case and in that case, there is a dispute. Rabbi Abahu said, this was explained to me personally by Rabbi Yochanan himself, who said, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi and I do not actually disagree with one another. We merely used different language to express the same law. So what is the meaning of to the beginning, which Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said? It is referring to the beginning of the wedding ceremony. And what is meant by the end? It is referring to the end of intercourse, right? So it's a two-step process, wedding and intercourse. At the end of that, for sure, they're fully married. At the beginning of that, for sure, they're betrothed and not married. Once they step under the wedding canopy and start the wedding, are they married? Once they complete the wedding ceremony under the canopy, are they married? Once they begin to have marital relations, are they now fully married? Once they reach the end of intercourse, for sure they're fully married, right? So that's what's at stake here. That's the possibilities. So what is meant by the end? It is referring to the end of intercourse, according to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's opinion is that after the marriage has been consummated by having marital relations, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei agree that the wife can no longer relinquish her rights verbally, can only be done in writing. And when I said that both in this case and in that case there is a dispute, says Rabbi Yochanan, I was referring to the beginning of the wedding ceremony and the end of the wedding ceremony, which is also the beginning of the time for intercourse. The end of the wedding ceremony is the beginning of the time when they are permitted to each other for marital relations. Consequently, according to Rav Dimi, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan agree that the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei applies only until the consummation of the marriage. After that point, they all agree that she cannot waive her rights verbally. When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, he reported this matter differently than Rav Dimi did. What did he say? He said that Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi said that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said in the name of Bar Kapara that their dispute between Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Yehuda is referring only to the end of the process, but with regard to the beginning, all agree that she can waive her rights verbally. And Rabbi Yochanan said, both in this case and in that case, there is a dispute. Rabbi Abahu said, this was explained to me personally by Rabbi Yochanan himself, who said, I and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi do not disagree with one another. What is the meaning of the end? Which Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, it is the end of the wedding ceremony. And what is the meaning of the beginning? The beginning of the wedding ceremony. And when I said that both in this case and in that case there is a dispute, I was referring to the beginning of intercourse and the end of intercourse. Consequently, according to Ravin, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan agree that at the time of the wedding ceremony, the wife can still verbally waive her rights. And the dispute of the Tanaim is referring to the time after the ceremony, which is also the beginning of the time for the consummation of marriage. So presumably, even once the wedding ceremony is finished, she can still waive her rights verbally. And then one of them says as soon as they begin to have marital relations, or maybe as soon as they are fit to have marital relations, which is the same as the end of the wedding ceremony, she can still waive her rights under the marriage contract verbally. But once they have had sex, there's no more verbal waiver. She can only give up some of her rights if she does it in writing. So Rav Pappa said, had Rabbi Abahu not said that this was explained to me personally by Rabbi Yochanan himself, that i.e. Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi do not disagree with one another, then I, Rav Pappa, would have said that the way to understand the various texts is that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi do disagree with one another, whereas Rav Dimi and Ravin do not disagree with one another, but rather they both cited the same tradition from Eretz Yisrael. Right? So there was a tradition, sort of 3 generations deep, in Israel, And then that tradition was communicated to the community in Babylonia. And it was communicated by two different traveling sages. And it's possible that one of the, they heard it or they made a mistake in the transmission. Either it was transmitted to them with a mistake, or they made a mistake when they brought it over to Babylonia, and that the original tradition itself did not contain a disagreement in it. Or it's possible that both heard it correctly, but there was already a dispute about what the tradition was back in Israel. So Rav Pappa is saying, I would have thought that that there was originally a disagreement between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, and that the guys who transmitted to Babylonia, transmitted correctly. But now that you said that you heard directly from Rabbi Yochanan that he and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi do not disagree, so then we have to find a different way to understand it. So what does Rav Pappa do? He says, if I hadn't heard that, I would have explained it like this. What is the meaning of the word end, which Ravin said? It is referring to the end of the wedding ceremony. And what is the meaning of the word beginning, which Rav Dimi said? It is referring to the beginning of the time designated for intercourse, which begins when? At the end of the wedding ceremony. It would then follow that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan disagreed about their explanation of the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei, whereas Rav Dimi and Ravin both said the same thing. So what is Rav Pappa teaching us? Since he accepts Rabbi Abahu's statement, he acknowledges that his alternate way of reading the sources is incorrect. So what then is the point of telling us that he would have explained Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's and Rabbi Yochanan's words differently? And the Gemara explains, Rav Pappa is teaching us this. If we were discussing the meaning of an Amoraic dispute, meaning a dispute between the sages of the Gemara, as opposed to a Tanaitic dispute, a dispute between the rabbis of the Mishna, right? So if we are making a discussion about a dispute between rabbis of the Gemara, Amoraim, it teaches us, if we are discussing the meaning of an Amoraic dispute about which we have different traditions, it is better to explain that two Amoraim disagree with regard to their own reasons, and not that the two Amoraim disagree according to the opinion of some other Amora, as it is more plausible to say that there is a dispute about logical reasoning than that there is a dispute about the correct transmission of halachic tradition. Consequently, had Rabbi Abahu not declared that he was told otherwise by Rabbi Yochanan, it would have been preferable to explain that there is a logical dispute between Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan, rather than saying that the dispute is about the details of the tradition received by Rav Dimi and Ravin. And that is counterintuitive, right? We would have thought that when there's this complex chain of transmission, one sage reporting in the name of another sage, who reported in the name of a third sage, who maybe reported in the name of a fourth sage, going back many years, and then we end up with a dispute, we might be tempted to quickly say, it must have been that there was some detail was lost in that chain of transmission. We must have got it wrong in the chain. Let's amend the chain of transmission so that the debate now squares easily. That's quite easy to do, and we learn right there, it's the wrong approach. The sages were very careful to memorize the tradition exactly as they had received it, and it was more likely when a disagreement arose that the sages involved had some kind of logic, a matter of logic at stake between them. Not just that it was transmitted improperly, but that they had a reason, right? That the law had been interpreted in the wrong way. They had a debate about how the law should be interpreted, how the law should be applied. Either a logic error, a spiritual error, but not a transmission error, right? Not a transmission error. That's a very easy way to end a dispute and to kind of rewrite history or to rewrite the law to accommodate the outcome you're looking for. And we should not do that. That's what we just learned from Rav Pappa. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1. Mishnah number 2. Here in chapter 5, one gives a virgin 12 months from the time the husband asks to marry her after having betrothed her, in order to prepare herself with clothes and jewelry for the marriage. And just as one gives a woman this amount of time, so too does one give a man an equivalent period of time to prepare himself, as he too needs time to prepare for the marriage. Okay, now that right there is exactly what we expected, because we've been talking all through our journey so far through Tractate Kesubos about the fact that in ancient times, very standard amount of time to wait, up to a year between the betrothal and the marriage. And now it makes sense. Why do they need to do that? In ancient times, to set up a new home, it wasn't like you just go to Bed Bath & Beyond and you've got money in your bank account, or you take out your credit card and you get what you need. It's not a big deal. Back then, it was a very big deal. Getting the actual implements of a household was a big expense, and that's why to have a dowry often meant, that chest of things that a woman needs to run the kitchen, the clothes that she'll need in her marriage, and poor people, really scrimped and saved to afford that kind of stuff for people, the young couple to set up shop in a new house. And so from the time of betrothal, okay, a year. You need a year to get ready. But is that the law? And just as one gives a woman this amount of time, so too you give the man that amount of time. However, in the case of a widow who already has items available from her previous marriage, she is given only 30 days to prepare. If the appointed time for the wedding arrived and they did not get married due to some delay on the part of the husband, then the woman may partake of his food. And if her husband is a priest, she may even partake of his teruma. Even though she is an Israelite who is not permitted to eat teruma, consecrated food, until she marries the priest, and they're not married yet, the fact that the time of their marriage has arrived means that his obligation to sustain, to feed his wife, even if they're not living together yet, the time to start feeding her has arrived. And it makes sense that in the case of a widow, she might have come out of her previous marriage without so much assets, and she's like really needing to, get married and start to receive sustenance from her new husband. And if for some reason that wedding gets delayed, he showed that he's willing to marry her, and so he's got to be ready to support her once the time of the marriage arrives, the time of the wedding arrives, even if the wedding itself is delayed for some reason. And likewise, if she's marrying a priest, she can start eating his teruma. Now, the Tanaim disagree about the permission granted to a priest to sustain his betrothed with teruma before she is married to him. Rabbi Tarfon says he may give her all of her required sustenance from teruma. Once the time of the wedding has arrived, even if they're not married, he can give her what she needs from teruma. During her periods of impurity, for example, if she's menstruating, a person who's ritually impure cannot eat teruma. So if she's having her period, she can't eat teruma. She needs non-sacred food during that period, during that time. When she cannot partake of teruma, she could still use the teruma that her husband sends to her and sell it to a priest and exchange that money for non-sacred food with which to, fulfill her needs. Rabbi Kiva says this priest who is betrothed to an Israelite woman, and she's awaiting marriage, and the time of the marriage comes, and now he has to start sustaining her. He should send her food, at least half of it non-teruma, even if half of it is teruma, so that she has what to eat during periods of ritual impurity. And the Mishnah continues, a priest who is a yavam, as we learned in Tractate Yevamos, if a priest was married to a woman and he died and he hadn't had a child and he has a brother, so now she and the brother have a bond, the levirate bond together, and either they're going to perform chalitza, the ceremony which releases them so she can go marry someone else, or they're going to get married, and he's going to step into the shoes, as it were, of his brother who died. Their first child will become the heir of the brother who died. And then from then on, she's just like his regular wife in every way. So even before they actually marry, they have this levirate bond, which at the very least prohibits her from going off and marrying anyone else until they break the bond through chalitza. So a priest who is a yavam, i.e. his brother died childless after betrothing a woman, does not enable his Yavama to partake of teruma by virtue of her relationship with him. If she had completed 6 months of the 12-month wait for marriage under the aegis of the husband, and then he died, and she waited 6 more months under the aegis of the Yavam, or even if she completed all of the necessary time under the aegis, it's such a word, aegis, under the authority, in the realm, right, under the aegis of the husband, except for 1 day that she was under the aegis of the Yavam, or if she completed all of the necessary time under the aegis of the Yavam, except for 1 day that she was under the aegis of the husband, so she still may not partake of teruma. She can't partake of teruma from her Yavam until she's actually married to him. So this set of rulings concerning the permission granted a betrothed woman whose wedding date had arrived to partake of teruma is in accordance with the initial version of our Mishnah. However, after learning all that, we also learned that a court that convened after them in a later generation said a woman may not partake of teruma until she has actually entered the wedding canopy of her husband, who is a priest, and that is the law. That's the Mishnah number 2 here, chapter 5. Now we're in 57b, and here is the Gemara. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived that a virgin is given 12 months to prepare for her wedding? Rav Chisda said, it is based on the fact that the verse states, with regard to Rebekah, the wife of Yitzhak in Genesis, and her brother and mother said, let the damsel abide with us for days. Or 10, kind of an odd construction there, right? So this is when Abraham was getting old, and he had his son Yitzhak, who was still not married, and he wanted to make sure before he died that he got his son Yitzhak a bride. So he sent his servant Eliezer to go to the land from which Abraham came and to his kin, and that would be in the household of Lavan, who's the brother of Rivka, right? And the brother Lavan was sort of running things at that time. And, there's the whole story of Eliezer says to God, show me a sign that I have found the right bride for my master's son. And it should be that, if a woman comes out and I ask her for water and she says, sure, and I'll even water your camels for you, that would be the right one. And that's exactly what happened. And so he knew that it was arranged by God that this woman, this young, beautiful woman, Rebecca, should become the wife of Yitzhak, Isaac. And then he tells that whole story. We hear the story of what happens at the well. Then he tells the whole story again for the family. And then I think he even tells it a third time in the Torah, which is so terse. And we learn about the events of, decades or even centuries in just a sentence or two. Here spends many, many, many verses telling this whole elaborate story multiple times. And then we learn a bunch of lessons even from the slight, subtle variations in the tellings. At any rate, after they agree with Eliezer that Rebecca should go with this man and marry Isaac, and she agrees that she will go with this man and that she will marry Isaac, then her family, right, her mom and her brother say, okay, we agree and she can go marry, but this whole thing happened very suddenly. Let her stay here at home so we can all, get used to the idea that she's leaving, make a proper goodbye, equip her to have all of her needs that, she'll need as a bride setting up a new home, and she can go in a certain amount of time. How long? And so says Lavan, let her reside here with us for days or 10. Like you would have thought he would say, well, let her stay with us for 10 days or a month, or let her wait here for 30 days or at least 10. Let her wait here for 12 months or at least 10. But he says this odd formulation, let her reside with us for days or 10. And because it's an odd formulation, now the sages are going to debate. So the Gemara first analyzes the language of the verse. What is the meaning of days? Normally, days means at least 2, right? The minimum number of days that would qualify for the plural word days. So more than 1 day is at least 2. Now, if we say 2 days, the minimum number, justifying the use of the plural, does a person really speak like this? Let her stay here for 2 days or 10. Rebekah's relatives said to Abraham's servant that they wanted her to stay for 2 days, after which he said to them, no, as he did not want to wait even that long. And so if so, is it possible that after they said to him that they wanted her, they said, let her stay for 2 days, and Eliezer says no, and then would they say, well, then let her stay for 10 days? That doesn't make sense. Consequently, it is impossible to explain the word days as 2 days and 10 as 10 days. Rather, what is the meaning of days? It means a year. As it is written in Leviticus 25:29, for days he shall have redemption. And there it is explained that in that context, the word days is referring to a full year. Consequently, in the verse, and her brother and mother said, let the damsel abide with us for days, or 10. Days means a year. And 10 refers to a shorter period of similar magnitude, 10 months. So they said to Eliezer, let her stay with us for a year. And he said, no, I got to take her. Well, then at least let her stay with us for 10 months. And the Gemara asks, and let us say that days means a month, as it is written, but a whole month of days in Numbers 11:20. And the verse about Rebekah might have then meant that her family wanted her to wait for a month. Let her stay with us for a month. Eliezer says no. Okay, well then let her stay with us at least for 10 days. So they say, but the Gemara says, one derives the meaning of an unspecified use of the term days from another unspecified instance of the term days, which means a year. And one does not derive the meaning of an unspecified use of the term days, as here, from an instance of the term days about which the term month is actually stated. Consequently, it can be derived from the verse that the ordinary amount of time required for a virgin to prepare for marriage is 12 months, right? That's where they get this idea that the standard amount of time from betrothal to marriage for a virgin, meaning for her first marriage, is 12 months. Rabbi Zeir said, it was taught in the Tosefta, Kesubos 5:1, with regard to a minor girl. Now recall there's 3 stages in the development of a woman. She's a minor until she's 12. She's a young woman until she's 12 and a half. And then she's an adult from 12 and a half on. We still have that technically in terms of a girl becoming obligated in the mitzvahs in which women are obligated. That happens when she has her bat mitzvah. And that happens when she's 12. We don't marry girls off when they're 12, haven't in centuries. And as we'll see, it was not optimal even in ancient times to marry girls off at such a young age, but it became necessary, as we'll read in a note shortly, because of the hardships and persecution of exile. So Rabbi Zeir said, it was taught in the Tosefta with regard to a minor girl. Either she or her father may delay the wedding until she has reached majority. And the Gemara asks, well, granted, she, the girl herself, may delay the wedding if she feels that she is not ready, as she is the one who will be directly affected. But why should her father be allowed to delay the wedding? Meaning, if the girl wants the wedding, why should the father be allowed to delay it? If it is suitable for her to get married, what difference does it make to her father? And the Gemara answers, well, the father thinks perhaps she agrees to get married now because she does not fully know what she is doing. But tomorrow, she will realize that the marriage was a mistake. And remember what? She's a minor. She can anytime say, you know what? Not for me. And return to her father's house. And the marriage is not divorced, but is annulled as if there never had been a marriage. She can do that while she's a minor. So since she might do that, the father can say, you know what, I don't want to put you in that situation where you might go and then change your mind. Wait until you're an adult and then get married. And the father has the right to say that. So Rabbi Abba Bar Levi said, one may not finalize an agreement to marry a minor girl in order to marry her while she is still a minor. Meaning, you cannot marry her off while she's still a minor. according to Rabbi Abba Bar Levi. But one may finalize an agreement to marry a minor girl in order to marry her when she becomes an adult woman. You can make the betrothal while she's a minor, but what you're promising is that she will marry, the couple will marry when she's an adult, not when she's a minor. But wait a minute, we've seen all these cases, right, where the girl gets married when she's a minor and she has that right of refusal so she can come back. Why does that right of refusal exist? Because she could get married when she's a minor. But now we're learning, but that's not even allowed. So what's going on? Now, with regard to the latter law, the Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? If he will marry her when she becomes an adult woman, there's nothing unusual about this case. And the Gemara answers, well, lest you say that one should be concerned that she might become afraid of marriage from making these plans now, and this will cause her resolve to weaken, and then even when she becomes an adult, she will maintain reservations about the matter. Rabbi Abba Bar Levi therefore teaches us that one need not be concerned about this. One may finalize an agreement to marry her as an adult, even while she is still a minor. Now, what is the law? It is prohibited for one to betroth his minor daughter to a man until she comes of age and expresses her desire to marry a particular person, as explained in Tractate Kiddushin and in the Gemara here. So all these times that we've been discussing about betrothing or marrying a minor girl, it's prohibited. But what it seemed to come up all the time. Why is that? Here we go. As explained in Tractate Kiddushin and in the Gemara here. Now the Rima, based on Tosafos on Tractate Kiddushin, writes that despite this prohibition, people were accustomed to betrothing their minor daughters due to the hardships caused by exile. Parents did not always have the basic requirements of a wedding available, and were not always able to find a suitable match for their daughters due to the small numbers of Jews in their vicinity. Therefore, if parents found an appropriate match for their daughter and were able to fund the wedding, they would marry her off at that point due to fear that they would not be able to do so later on. And this was the accepted practice primarily during times of hardship. So as you see, the idea is they had to derive a whole body of law for what to do during those times of hardship. But it's only during those extreme times of hardship when they needed these extreme measures of marrying off the girls very young, because they might end up not married at all, or they might get killed or raped or taken away by the oppressive forces of the government that were keeping the Jews down. And it's only during periods like that, right? Like when you think about, for example, all these horrific stories that you hear, survival stories during the Holocaust, and the extreme measures people had to go to, eating any kind of food, certainly non-kosher food if it will save their lives, etc. And, and hastily arranged marriages and people sharing beds and all kinds of things that people had to do just to survive. Okay, you don't derive laws from periods like that to extend into times of peace when people can behave the way things are supposed to, do things the way they're supposed to be done. So now we understand much better that all this talk of marrying girls off when they're so young, that was only happening as, under emergency measures. It's not the normal thing. Tragically, the Jews had to deal with emergency times, often in their history, but certainly not all the time. Even as we hear about terrible, times, for instance, when there were crusades, the Christians going to fight Muslims in the Holy Land, about 1,000 years ago. That often began with a pogrom against the Jews, sort of to get traveling money for the crusade. Look it up. But, it's not like crusades were being launched all the time from all corners of Europe. There were German persecutions, there were French persecutions, there were English persecutions, German persecutions, many persecutions of the Jews. But it's not like it was heavy persecution all the time. So there were definitely distinctions between times of danger and times of peace. Rav Huna said, if she has reached her majority, even for just one day, and then she is betrothed, she is given her 30 days to prepare for her wedding, like a widow, since prior to reaching adulthood, she presumably had already prepared everything that she needed for her marriage. Now the Gemara raises an objection from a Baraisa. If she grew up, she is similar to a betrothed woman who has been asked to marry her betrothed. What, is it not that she is similar to a virgin who has been asked to marry and she has 12 months to prepare? And the Gemara answers, no, it means that she is similar to a widow who has been asked to marry her betrothed, who gets only 30 days to prepare. Only young women who have not reached majority and who are virgins get a year to prepare. After majority, all women, regardless of whether they are virgins, get only 30 days to prepare. It's not so different from modern times. I mean, in modern times, we do the betrothal and the marriage on the same day. We do have, let's keep going. The Gemara attempts another refutation of Rav Huna's statement. Come and hear a proof from a Mishna from Tractate Nedarim on page 73b. If a grown woman waited 12 months since betrothal and is still not married, Rabbi Eliezer says, since her husband is obligated to provide for her sustenance, he may also nullify her vows. It can be inferred from this that the waiting period for a grown woman is 12 months. So the Gemara responds by amending the text of the Mishnah, say that if a grown woman waited 30 days or a young woman waited 12 months, Rabbi Eliezer says, since her husband is obligated to feed her, to provide her sustenance, he may also nullify her vows. So the Gemara attempts another refutation of Rav Huna's statement. Come and hear a Baraisa. If someone betrothed a virgin, whether the husband asked to marry her and she delays the process because she says that she requires more time, or whether she asked to marry him and the husband delays the process because he is not yet ready, she is given 12 months from the time of the request was issued, but not from the time of the betrothal, even if that was much earlier. And a grown woman is similar to one who has been asked to marry. How is this so? If she has reached her majority for one day, and she is then betrothed, she is given 12 months from the day of her betrothal because it is the same as the day of her majority. And one who was already a betrothed woman when she reached majority, like they made the betrothal while she was a minor, once she reaches her majority, she's given 30 days. Therefore, the refutation of the opinion of Rav Huna is a conclusive refutation. So the Gemara asks, what is meant by the words, and one who was already a betrothed woman is given 30 days? Rav Pappa said this is what it is saying with regard to a grown woman who has been an adult for 12 months and she is then betrothed. She is given 30 days like a widow and not another 12 months. So which is it? Okay, we all agree that a widow from the time of betrothal to marriage, she's given 30 days. They may want to wait longer than that, but 30 days after the betrothal, the husband has to start paying for her food and sustaining her. But in the case of a young woman, a virgin, from the time of her betrothal, it seems to be 12 months. What is the law? If one requests to marry his betrothed after she has reached adulthood, she is given 12 months from the day that she reached majority. Similarly, if she is betrothed during the first 12 months after reaching majority, she has until the end of those 12 months to prepare her wedding, even if he requested an earlier wedding date. If the betrothal or the request occur more than 12 months after her majority, so like a regular adult, she is given only 30 days, as stated in the Baraisa, and in accordance with Rav Pappa, as he is the later Amora. And you can see that this is actually to her benefit, right? That 30 days after the betrothal, he's got to start feeding her, and that's the way it's going to run, whether you're marrying a woman who's 13 years old or 30 years old. Right? She comes under his aegis and he has to start feeding her. When you're marrying a very young woman, okay, she's living in her father's house. Let her father keep feeding her until it's time to marry. So the Mishnah states, if the appointed time for the wedding arrived and they did not get married, she may partake of teruma if she's marrying a priest, a Kohen. So Ula said by Torah law, the daughter of a non-priest betrothed to a priest may partake of teruma immediately, even before the wedding date arrives. As it is stated, if a priest buy any soul, the acquisition of his money, he may eat of it. Meaning, if a Kohen buys a slave, then any person who's now a part of the household of the priest, even if he entered the household by being purchased as a slave, he may eat the consecrated food, the holy food that only priests and their households can eat. And so what they're saying here is, so the Torah says that one purchased with money, meaning a slave, can start eating teruma. But when one betroths a woman, they use that same language of acquisition. Obviously, it's not the same as buying a slave, but there has to be some exchange of value, even if it's symbolic value, that he gives to her, so that he acquires her. And so that happens even at the time of betrothal, and so she should be able to start eating teruma at that time. And this woman also is the acquisition of his money through betrothal. Therefore, she is entitled to partake of teruma. And what then is the reason the sages said that she may not partake of teruma yet at the time of betrothal? It is lest someone pour her a cup of teruma while she is in her father's house. Although she may drink it as the betrothed of a priest, since she is still living in her father's house, there is concern that she will give her brother or sister to drink from her teruma wine, which is prohibited since they're not betrothed to a priest, they're only Israelites, and they may not eat teruma. So the Gemara asks, if so, that if the time arrived and they did not get married, there should also be concern that she might give to members of her family that teruma, as she is still living in her father's house. Why then does the Mishna say that she is permitted to partake of teruma at the time that the time for her wedding arrived and they're still not married, but she's still living in her father's house? Why can't she start eating teruma then? Why is there not the concern that she might share some of her food with her brothers and sisters for whom it would be prohibited to eat teruma? Shouldn't it be the same concern if the reason she can't start eating teruma at the time of her betrothal is because she might share that food with her brothers and sisters? Why is it different at this later date? And what is the answer? And the Gemara answers, there, after the time for the wedding has arrived, he, the husband, designates a specific place for her. Since her husband is obligated to provide for her sustenance, from that time on, he will want to ensure that she receives her food in a particular place so that she not use it to feed her family. And this mitigates the concern that she might inadvertently give it to her brother and sister to drink, and they might eat or drink teruma that's prohibited to them. So the Gemara asks, however, if that is so, then the law should also be that a gleaner who is a priest, meaning a priest who's working, as a crop picker for a farmer who's not a priest, right? So if a gleaner who is a priest is employed by an Israelite, meaning a non-priest, that he may not partake of teruma, lest the other members of the Israelite's household come to eat with him from the teruma. And the Gemara rejects this. Now, even though the members of the Israelite household feed the priest from their food, as he's working for them, would they eat from his food? No, they would not. Therefore, there is no reason for concern and no reason to prohibit him from eating his own teruma. This is Ula's opinion. However, Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yehuda said the reason for the rabbinic decree is due to abrogation, meaning cancellation of the contract. It may become known after the betrothal that she has blemishes that can retroactively annul the betrothal, and it would then become apparent that she had partaken of teruma unlawfully. Better she shouldn't start eating teruma yet. And the Gemara asks, if so, if the rabbinic decree that prohibits a woman betrothed to a priest from partaking of teruma is due to concern for possible abrogation of the marriage, then a woman who entered the wedding canopy but is not yet engaged in sexual intercourse, as we were discussing at the beginning of today, pertaining to the end of the discussion of the Mishna number 1, she should also be prohibited from partaking of teruma, as the husband does not yet know whether she has any blemishes. Right? He's marrying a virgin. He might find that she's not a virgin, which would end up annulling then she would be rejected. She'd have to go back to her father's house. The Gemara answers, there in that situation, he investigates her through the agency of his female relatives and only then enters the wedding canopy. Consequently, there's no longer any concern about abrogation, that the marriage will be canceled because of this blemish of hers, and so we don't worry that she started to eat teruma prematurely. The Gemara asks, however, if that is so, then according to this rationale, a priest's slave, whom the priest purchased from an Israelite, should not partake of his teruma due to the concern of abrogation. Perhaps the priest will discover a defect in the slave, resulting in the retroactive cancellation of the acquisition and causing the slave to return to his Israelite master after he had mistakenly eaten teruma. The Gemara answers, there is no abrogation with regard to slaves, since no type of defect could cause the cancellation of the transaction. The reason for this is that if the defect is external, then he sees it at the point of sale and he accepts it. And if the defect is internal, since he needs the slave for labor, concealed defects do not concern him. With regard to other types of defects, for example, if the slave was discovered to be a thief or a gambler, well, it has come to him, meaning that the seller has caught the buyer in a binding transaction, and he, the priest, the buyer, cannot annul the sale due to this kind of defect, as these characteristics are common in slaves. And what is the law if it was discovered that the slave was an armed bandit, or that the king had signed his death warrant, and there is a danger that the government will catch and execute the slave? These are serious and uncommon defects that in principle could invalidate the sale. However, these defects generate publicity. In such unusual and severe circumstances, I'm at the top of 58A. I'm almost done. If you have questions or comments, get them in. These kind of defects, severe defects, would cause publicity about the slave. Therefore, it is assumed that the buyer knew about them as well and nevertheless agreed to buy the slave. Consequently, there is no reason to revoke the sale of the slave, and therefore we're not concerned that the slave started to eat the priest's teruma prematurely when he joined the household. And the Gemara asks, after all, according to this sage Ula, and according to that sage, excuse me, Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yehuda, she may not partake of teruma. So what is the difference between them? And the Gemara answers, the practical difference between them is in the cases where he, the buyer or the husband, accepted as he transferred or went. Meaning, if the husband explicitly accepted her blemishes, there is no concern with regard to abrogation, but there is still a concern that she will give her family members teruma, wine. Conversely, if the father transferred his daughter to the agents of the husband and entrusted her to their care, or if the father's own agents went with the girl and the agents of the husband, there is no longer concern that she might give her family members teruma, as she is not with them. But there is still the concern about abrogation, that the agreement might be canceled. All right, that's what we've got today. Let's check comments or questions. Here on page 58. I'm sorry, here on page 57. Tomorrow's page is 58. Carolyn, are there any prerequisite conditions for annulments? Right, so, as we've seen, an annulment of a marriage, so where no divorce would be necessary, would happen if the marriage took place while she was still a minor and she exercises her right of refusal. She could just walk away from it. Otherwise, for there to be an annulment, it would have to be that, there was some kind of misleading information, right? So, for example, they told the husband that he's marrying a virgin, and it turns out that she's not a virgin. That would be grounds to cancel the marriage, and that could be an annulment, I think, without an actual bill of divorce. But it's very limited. And once they're actually married, like the only thing that could be an annulment, for example, is the case, that we had in Tractate Yevamos, where a husband went overseas, maybe he went to war, and then witnesses came, let's say 2 witnesses came, and testified that they saw that man killed. So the widow remarried. And then it turns out those witnesses were wrong, and the husband returns. So now the marriage to the second husband was never a marriage, because she was always married to the first husband. They just thought he was dead. She didn't do anything wrong if she relied on the testimony of 2 witnesses. So she can return to her husband in that situation because of this big mistake that was made. And that second marriage was never really a marriage, so you would say that it would be annulled. Those are some of the possibilities. Tom, did priests still continue to receive teruma after the destruction of the temple? Right, so really good question. And I think the answer is generally no. By Torah law, they might have continued teruma for a while. I think maybe even in Bavel we read about it by rabbinic decree, but it kind of went away pretty quickly. because once the temple system was not there and the tithing, that was also, part of the Meiser Sheni for going up to the temple, and sort of pretty quickly the whole system fell apart, and there was no longer teruma for the priest, is my understanding. That's my off-the-cuff answer. I really want to do a deeper dive before giving you a good answer, so I'm not sure. Sharon, so it sounds like the marriage arrangements that are impacting these legal determinations were later cultural circumstances and not based on Torah laws. Right, but the Torah provides that right of refusal. So the Torah, allows a man to marry a minor, that the family can marry her off when she's a minor. The sages said it's a terrible idea and prohibited it. But then in later times, that rabbinic decree was set aside because of the emergency under those persecutions. And then when we're not in times of persecution, you're not supposed to marry a minor girl, right? And please, we're not talking about statutory rape and that body of law, under secular authority, which Jews are bound by, right? So you can't marry a minor girl anyway in a state where that's not allowed, or in a country where that's not allowed, because the law of the land is the law for the Jews, unless that law directly contradicts a Torah law and demands that you do something that would violate Torah law. So if you lived in a country where they had a law that you had to bow down to an idol, you would have to break that law because it directly contradicts Torah law. But if you live in a country that says you can't marry a woman until she's 18, then even though there are provisions for marrying girls when they're younger than that, you have to wait until she's 18. And that's, pretty widespread in the world today. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, for paid.